Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So as you can see, we are continuing with Parshat Re'eh, and we are actually doing this is Parshat Re'eh. One of the things that is notable about it is that Moses reviews some of the laws of Kashrut, which were mentioned back in the book of Leviticus, and we see a parallel here in the book of Deuteronomy, which is a reason why it's called Deuteronomy. That is to say, second law, and going over the laws, many of them, a second time. So we're actually in the middle of a list of animals that are not permissible. And here, in fact, we're talking about one of the most famous animals that are not permissible. And that is, as you can see, ve'et hachazir, the pig, the pig. And the reason why is that we're told that the only large animals that we're allowed to eat or have to chew the cud and have split hooves. They have to have both. And of course, the issue of kashrut is a large issue because eating is such a very basic activity and such a fundamental activity on the part of human beings. And there have been attempts to find rational reasons for why, some having to do with apparently trichinosis is something that if one eats pig meat, there's a possibility of that. As I said, there have been attempts to rationalize these mitzvot because they sound so arbitrary. And at, and some of them, I'm not saying that there aren't any perhaps rational reasons in the sense of physical reasons that occur within the animal itself or why we don't eat these animals. The truth is, of course, that we are what we eat. We consume things and they become part of who we are as human beings. So there's been examples of that it has to do with spirituality, that by eating these particular animals, it helps us physically to be able to train ourselves in that regard, or put our bodies in that and minds, etc. Um, and it's an interesting, may have some validity to it. Sadly, none of the rational reasons, not a single one, is enough to convince people who don't want to keep kosher to keep kosher. I find the most valid reason for me is simply that these kinds of mitzvot that do not necessarily have rational bases to them, like thou shalt not steal or thou shalt not murder, etc., that these are opportunities that God gives us to demonstrate the love we have for God, because you do something out of love when there isn't any other reason to do it, but simply out of an expression of wanting to please the person who you love. And so this kind of kashrut becomes in a very important way in which we can demonstrate the love that we have for God. However, more recently, it has occurred to me that there might be a rational, that is to say, a deeply psychological reason for why kashrut actually is far more important, even though it seems like a venial sin. Nevertheless, I think that it is a foundation of something far more important as to how we conduct our lives, and aspects that can give us longevity and good lives. And that is the idea that we have to eat, but it doesn't mean we have license to eat simply anything. And that we have to recognize that within what is permissible, there are certain things that are permissible and certain things that are not permissible. And being able to control ourselves and control our emotions becomes a very important way in which we liberate ourselves. That being able to live in a world where there are things that are permissible, and now we're talking about appetite, appetite. Being able to control our appetite on some kind of level is actually a profound act. And of course, there are other, excuse me, I'm sorry. I think I can hear other sounds. If you need to mute, please do. Okay, thank you. So that, for example, when it comes to sexuality, that is also an appetite. There are many areas where there are profound appetites, and again, within the area of sexuality and those the part that involves lust, it's that the Torah doesn't say that engaging in sexual activities is forbidden, but at the same time to say that some are permissible and some are not. And the truth is, when it comes to our food and eating, in some ways it's a lot easier. Maybe I'm extrapolating too much, but it seems to me that that is the easier part to control than when it comes to our sexuality. And so this all becomes part of the same kind of idea that we need to be able to control our appetites. And this, in a way, is a daily reminder and a daily practice that allows us to be able to not wind up in a terrible situation. Because, of course, recently within the news, we have the situation with Epstein and what went on there. And we know of the terrible things that were going on in regards to his feeding, his sexual needs. And of course, he was not the only person, but he is one such example, terrible example of sexual lusts, just uncontrolled, totally uncontrolled, and the lives that were affected, the young girls whose lives were deeply affected by his behavior and his partner's behavior. So kashrut is actually one of those areas which we may poo-poo on a level, but the truth is it actually has far greater implications than we might realize. So just some thoughts that have occurred to me as I've thought about this. At any rate, here we are reading about the pig, and because, as you can see, when it comes to animals, there are far fewer animals that we are actually permitted to eat than are forbidden. Most, in fact, are forbidden in this case. So I'll do the Hebrew, et hachazir, the pig, ki mafris parsahu, because it has split hoofs, velo gera, but he doesn't chew the cud. It doesn't chew the cud. Tamehu lachem, it is impure to you. Mibsaram lo tochelu, you shall not eat of their flesh, their meat. Uvenivlatam lo tigau, and you shall not touch their carcasses, which is, of course, a step beyond consuming. And we'll take a look because this raises some questions, and Rashi is going to explain what's going on here. Let's take a look. Okay. So the fact that it mentions uvenivlatam lo tigau, you shall not touch their carcasses. And this is in the Torah Kohanim, this is in the Sifra. Rabotenu Parshu, our rabbis explained by Regel that this element of not touching, not even touching their carcasses is on a pilgrim festival. It's on pilgrim festivals where that law applies. It is limited to that particular law. So I guess if you want to wear pigskin shoes made out of pigskin leather, this is not forbidding you, at least biblically, it's not forbidding you from doing that, except on Yontif, on the pilgrim festivals. Why? Sha'adam chayav letaher et atzmo baregel. So because an individual is obligated to purify himself on the pilgrim festivals. They are times, they are in a way appointments. The word moed means appointments, and they are appointments with the divine. And so we want to be in a spiritually pure condition when we encounter these particular moments. So this law applies on the holidays. So, but it's you can't just say that arbitrarily, but why? So here we go. Yachol, we have a reductio ad absurdum. In other words, let's assume the opposite. Yachol iyu muzarim b'chol hashana. Well, we could argue, why can't we say that they're forbidden to do it the entire year? Why are we limiting it to the festivals? Talmud Lomar, because scripture teaches in Leviticus chapter 21, Emor el HaKohanim, because there the Leviticus says, say to the priests, right? And there it limits it to the priests, etc. Umatum atame. There, the priests are being forbidden to come in contact with a corpse. Remember the idea of impurity, right? Vaha umatum atamet chamura, right? That we know that when it comes to the impurity of a corpse, of a human corpse, that is a very high level of impurity, chamura. Kohanim Mozarim, but there only the priests are warned about this. They're the only people who are warned that they cannot come in contact with a corpse and then go ahead and serve at the altar. And period. They're told they can only remember we have a law that a priest is only allowed to become impure for his father, his mother, his wife, his brother, sister, or child, right? They are told they cannot come in contact, period. Ve'en Yisrael muzarim, but no Israelite, no non-priest, regular Israelite, muzarim tumat, to muzarim. They're not forbidden. Only the priests are forbidden. Tumat nevela kala, but since the tuma that comes from touching a carcass is a much lighter form of impurity, lo kol shechen, shouldn't we say that if in fact priests are forbidden only when it comes to corpses, okay, from touching them at all, and Israelites are permitted, then we should say that the same would apply to a lighter form of impurity. So this is called a kal vachomer. This kind of deduction is called a kal vachomer. Does somebody have a question? I wasn't sure if somebody was raising a question. Okay, so it's very important that this is one of the principles in which Torah law is interpreted. And this means this is a law of the Torah. Even though it's not explicitly stated in the Torah, it is using one of the principles of logical deduction to be able to derive deeper and further laws in the Torah itself. So that's regarding animals. Etzot tochlu, and this you may eat, mikol asher b'mayim, from anything that is in the water. Kol asher lo snapir v'kaskeset, anything that has fins and scales, tochelu you shall eat. V'chol asher ein lo snapir v'kaskeset, and anything that doesn't have fins and scales, lo tochelu, you shall not eat. And that is why, according to Jewish law, Jews are forbidden to eat crab or lobster or shrimp or oysters or anything like that. And of course, there are also other mammals that live in the sea or in water that do not have fins and scales. But again, all this idea that are we allowed to eat fish? Yes, and the fact of the matter is, I can't say for certain, but in this particular case, I think there are more sea creatures, aquatic creatures or species of aquatic creatures that have fins and scales than don't have fins and scales. But again, we are saying that while we can eat, we are limited. We have to control our appetites. And of course, we know people eat octopus, they eat pretty much anything. Catfish, for example, are forbidden because catfish do not have scales. Tamehu lachem, they shall be impure to you. And I could say the fact that it says they're impure to you as opposed to non-Israelites, non-Jews. So we've dealt with animals, we've dealt with fish, and now we're going to go on Kol tzipor tohora tochelu. And it says, any pure bird you shall consume, you can eat. So we have to, what happens is now to define what are impure birds. And we're going to see about the implication of this. Kol sipor Torah tofelu. And in Tractate Kiddushin, page 57, Lahatir Mishulachat Shebe Metzora. This is to include, when it says cold sipor, right, any pure bird, it's to include the bird, it's a kind of dove or pigeon that is part of the ceremony of the purification of a leper. And one of the birds is let go, let free. And the fact that it says cold sipor, you can eat, meaning including the bird that was sent away in the purification of a leper. One might argue that since it was part of a sanctification, right, a type of offering, that since non-Kohanim are not allowed to eat uh, basically most of sanctified offering unless they're specifically allowed to eat it, and that has to do with shlamim. That's a part of a sacrifice where the person bringing the sacrifice is permitted to eat of it as long as they're in a state of purity. We don't have to be in a state of purity to eat birds. Okay. Okay. Going on.
I think
You go ahead, please.
the birds of prey are not
Yeah,
to eat.
so that's a good. You're raising, Harlan. You're raising an interesting point, and the rabbis, in fact, in discussing this, try to determine the common factors of various birds. They're not all birds of prey, as you will see. They are not. Because we're going to list those birds, but they do basically say they do try to look at certain types of qualities, and I think you're in fact right that basically birds of prey are not permissible, even though we'll see it's going to list these birds, and you'll see that, as you can see, I have a translation of these various birds because unfortunately I'm not capable at this point I haven't learned a discipline by which to remember the names of these various birds specifically. They are discussed in the Talmud. I believe the Talmud, where a bird is not recognized or was not, the Hebrew wasn't something that they used, they then try to explain what bird they're talking about because they have a tradition. Please excuse me. V'zeh asher lo tuchlu mehem, and of these you shall not eat of them. Ha-nesher, so I know for a fact that a nesher refers to an eagle, so of course a bird of prey. V'ha-peres, the vulture. V'ha-oznia, and the black vulture. Let's take a look at Rashi. V'zeh asher lo tuchlu mehem. So look at this. So he says, and the reason why it goes on to have what appears to be a redundant statement is le'esor et hashchuta. That is to forbid even one that is properly slaughtered. Right, because one might think, well, it's referring to birds that are not properly slaughtered, and that if they are, it's okay. But when it says specifically these birds, we're talking even if they were properly slaughtered. So, v'hara'a, going on, the kite, v'et ha'aya, and the falcon, v'hadaya, and the buzzard, lemina, according to their species. So Rashi is trying to again help us understand what some of these birds are, right? Hara'a ve'et ha'aya v'gomer. So it's possible that the sentence, because it goes on with v'hara'a immediately there, okay, it's it ve'et ha'aya v'gomer. He ra'ah, he ayah. So it's saying that the ra'ah and the ayah, according to the Talmud, this is Tractate Chulin, by the way, which deals with and the meat and laws of slaughter, etc., that one is allowed to eat meat that is not sacrificial meat, and that we consume, that we can consume. At any rate, in there it points out that the ra'ah and the ayah and the daya are all the same bird. It's all the same bird. They're simply different names for the same bird. Velama nikra shma ra'ah. So why is this bird's name a ra'ah? Shero'ah beyoter, because it has incredible vision, right? We know that certain birds have amazing levels of vision, like hawks, right, etc., and eagles probably, right? But it says "Hira'ah beyoter." It has an incredible, and the word ro'eh is to see, so it has an incredible quality of vision. V'lama his hirach b'chol shmotam. So why is it forbidden? Why does the Torah forbid us to eat it with all using all her names, Shmoteha? Shelo liten pitchon peh, to not give an excuse, leva'al din, to someone who is coming to court, in other words, someone who's being accused of having eaten it, lachalok, to argue, right? Shelo yehe ha'asura, so that this particular, if it wasn't, he could say, "Well, I'm not eating an ra'ah, I'm eating an ayah." And even though it's the same, the fact is, even, in other words, even though it doesn't have the same name, it turns out that it is the same bird. And he might be arguing, if the Torah hadn't listed these other names, he could say, "Well, the Torah's, I'm not eating a ra'ah." Right? I'm eating an ayah, and that's perfectly permissible. So that's why the Torah includes these others, right? So, shelo yehe ha'asura, right? Kore ota ra'ah. Okay, that the forbidden bird is that he's eating isn't called a ra'ah. Haba lahatir, and the one who comes to say it's permissible, Omer would say, Zo daya, this is a daya. Shma, its name is a daya. Or ayah shma, or he might say, it is an ayah. It's called an ayah, the bird that I'm eating. Vezo lo asara katuv, and scripture didn't forbid it. That's why it's okay for me to eat it. Okay. Uva'ofot parat lacha hatmeim, and when it came to the birds, right, the Torah specifies for you the birds that are impure. L'lamed, to infer, right, to imply, sheha'ofot hatorim merubim, to tell you that there are many more pure birds, right? Because there's only a limited list of impure birds. And so to say that there are more birds that are considered tahor, that are considered pure, okay, al hatmeim, over the ones that are impure. The fichach parat et hamuat. And that's why the Torah specifies the smaller number. It names the smaller number because more birds in this case are permissible. So in looking at the list of we basically will be moving on to we'll keep going with the various birds, and the last category are goes to basically be reptiles. But if you look at the three categories that we've had, land creatures, right, large land creatures, etc., we were talking about very few are permissible. Very few can actually own. It's strictly ungulates. Right?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
what about grasshoppers?
Okay, so it does list specifically, again, it names the
Okay.
species of grasshoppers that are permissible. We'll have to see if they're listed here in Deuteronomy, but they're definitely listed in Leviticus, and they're the only species of insects that are permissible. So there are very, very few insects that are permissible, right? There are probably a larger number, more number of fish that in fact are permissible, or should I say not fish, but aquatic creatures, right? And here, when it comes to birds, more birds are permissible than forbidden, interestingly enough. Anyway, going on with the list of birds here. And of course, I had to look up pretty much every single list every single word. The kol orev, any species of ravens, so crows, ravens, lemino, according to its species. The et bat hayana, that's an ostrich. The et hatachmas, and the night hawk. The et hashachaf, and the seagull. The et hanetz, and the hawk, lemineu, according to their species. Please excuse me. Et hakos, the small owl, the little owl, the et hayanshuf, and the great owl, the hatin shamet, and the white owl. So Rashi actually, interestingly enough, disagrees with that translation. As you can see, hatin, the word is actually tinshemet, but it's in pause. It's at the end of the sentence, so it's pronounced tinshamet. And this is, it looks like this might be a French word which I do not recognize. Okay, but the Yiddish, there's a Yiddish translation that the editor put in, fledermois, and fledermois is a bat, a bat. So Rashi considers the Tin Shemet a bat, but here, as I said, there are disagreements as to the actual species that's being referred to in the Torah. The Haka'at, and the pelican, ve'et harachama, and the bustard, ve'et hashalach, and the cormorant. I'm not sure if it isn't a kingfisher, according to Rashi. We'll take a look. Here, shalach. And again from Tractate Huli, Hashole Dagin Min Hayam. In other words, it's called a shalach because it is able to capture fish from the sea, right? It's able to do that. So cormorants, I don't know if cormorants are in, when he says yam by sea, does he mean literally sea? I don't know if kingfishers live by the sea or if by the rivers and lakes. Again, I'm not sure about cormorants either. But at any rate, that's how he's understanding it. A chasida, the stork, v'ha'anafa, the heron, lemina, according to its species, v'haduchifat, that is the hoopoe, which I don't believe is a bird of prey, v'ha'atalef, and atalef, in modern Hebrew, it is understood as a bat as well. So again, how Rashi understands it, I'm not sure how he would translate that particular word. Going on, duchifat, right? So he explains this word duchifat. Hu tarnagol habar, it is a wild chicken. Uvelaz, and in a foreign language, here we are. This looks like harufa, hupo. So I think whatever this French word was, it sounded pretty much like a hupo. And in in Yiddish, it's Wiederhopf, which, because if you know what a hoopoe looks like, its crest, right? The carbalato, and its crest, kfula, it is doubled, and it goes back. It has quite a distinctive crest. So here we go. Okay. V'chol sheretz ha'of, okay, and all swarming birds. So I think we have to be talking about here, in other words, flying, swarming creatures. Tamehu lachem, they are considered impure. Lo ye'achelu, they shall not be eaten. So here it isn't mentioning the types of grasshoppers which do swarm, but any kind of swarming insects, etc. We're talking about flying, swarming insects, right? Kol of tahor tochelu. However, any pure bird you shall in fact consume. And let's see. Let's just stop. We'll stop right here, and we'll continue when we meet again with this, continuing with the issues of kashrut here. And stop the share. Yes, Harlan?
Yeah, they give a list of birds like chicken, capon, Cornish hen, turkey, domestic duck.
Mm,
and goose.
mm.
And the house sparrow and pigeon, you can eat that. You can eat the palm dove. You can eat the turtle dove. You can eat the partridge and the peacock. And then uh, they say that maybe you can eat the Guyana, Guyana bird and quail, maybe, and what they call today pheasant. You might be able to eat the pheasant. That's the list I was given by way.
Okay. So you're reminding me of a very important factor here, and that is that only domesticated birds are permissible. In other words, essentially, we are not, whether this is rabbinic, it would appear to be a rabbinic law that when it comes to birds, they have to be domesticated. You cannot eat while a Jewish observant Jew cannot eat a wild bird. So a wild chicken, a wild turkey, any of the wild birds are not permissible. They need to be domesticated. You have to have raised them. Although it's interesting because Rashi talks specifically about remember he mentioned the bird that is part of the ritual of cleansing the leper that is actually sent off into the wild. So whether or not this law regarding domesticated birds is a specific Ashkenazic law or whether it's a general law that's rabbinic, I'm not sure. But Harlan, thank you for reminding me about that particular factor. So,
Okay.
so in other words, you can't eat wild quail. At least
Yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
would say,
people
as an
like to hunt.
Ashkenazic Jew, you
People
cannot.
like yeah, but people like to hunt birds, and then you can't eat them if you're if you're killing them.
Well, part of
Why?
it, yeah. I mean, yes, it does not want to encourage trapping and hunting because technically speaking, if you trap the animal,
Mhm.
okay, not to say that trapping as it is forbidden, like they would trap fish. But if you trap an animal, you haven't killed it, and therefore you could technically slaughter it in a kosher manner. So again, these laws are very complicated and detailed, and we're just touching on the surface of them. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording and thank you.